You ready?
Good. Okay.
Recording in progress.
My name is Sarah Bogie. Today is April 14th, 2023, and the time is 9:15 a.m. We are at Pewaukee, VFW. I'm interviewing Bonnie Gluth, who was born on April 12th, 1952, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and served during the Vietnam era between 1973 and 1977. Bonnie Gluth was an E5 in the U.S. Army and served as a traffic analyst. The interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. So, Bonnie, what were you doing before you joined the Army?
I was going to school and working
It shut off again.
working full time, and my plan was to get a teaching degree at UWM.
Oh, wow. So, why did you want to join the Army suddenly?
That's the 70s was a very transitional time, and I had friends from high school, males who had been drafted, some that didn't come back during the Vietnam War, a very unpopular war. But I really felt if I was going to ask for equal treatment on the job, that I needed to also be willing to do the work. And that was a real emphasis. And the Army or military just opened up a lot of occupations at that time that weren't available to women before that.
So, what was the hardest part of leaving for the Army?
Leaving, I mean, I grew up in Pewaukee, in a small town, big family, and all of a sudden to be thrown into where you're not going to know anyone, you're not sure where you're going. I think my only trip prior to that was to Florida on vacation. So I didn't have a lot of worldly experience, I'll just say that.
So, how did your family react when you wanted to leave to go to the Army?
My father's a Navy veteran, so he was like, well, why didn't you go in the Navy?
Oh.
And there were reasons, because the job I wanted to do in the Army required a 4-year commitment, and to do that same job in the Navy required a 6-year commitment.
Got it.
And I wasn't sure yet if this was going to be what I wanted to do. So I thought, well, I have an escape route in 4 years. So that was why. The rest of my family was not supportive because of the Vietnam War. So
Interesting. So, did that affect your decision like greatly and make you kind of second guess yourself in your wanting to go off to the Army?
not so much that didn't, but when it actually, they had a delayed entry program. So you had like 3 months before you'd actually report for basic training. And during that time, I started to think, what did I just do? What am I going to be doing for the next 4 years? So that, I think I should have just gone right in instead of waited and delayed entry. But it was kind of so that I would be getting out of basic at a time when my other training was going to start. So it made sense.
So, where did you go first for your basic training?
I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama, which is no longer open. It was female basic training, and also where they trained military police.
So, how long was your basic training that you had to do?
It was 8 weeks, and it was very interesting. Again, this a transition time. Yeah.
So, tell me about your early weeks of training and how you adapted to the military life.
It was a big change, sleeping now in an open bay with like 45 women, some who snored. So, and very, getting up at reveille and watching the other classes march by, and just seeing like, wow, they're serious about this, they're very disciplined, and you better show up on time. So that was hard, and also you would just pray for a letter from home that there is an outside world out there. So that was hard.
So, what did you learn about during your training, your basic training?
It was funny because I was when they were still kind of old school. We came and we learned how to put on makeup and how to wear your hair up, because you couldn't have your hair on your collar. And we had little mint green exercise suits. And by the end of my 8 weeks, the group across from us, they were training in fatigues instead of exercise suits. Big transition. So it's also learning this is a very fluid environment. Things are going to change, and you need to be able to adapt.
So, what was the best part of the basic training?
I think the people that I met that I wouldn't have met otherwise, I mean, there were girls from all over the country. I think that was very good.
And on the other side of it, what was the hardest?
Um, the
Just the adapting?
the adapting and the restrictions. You weren't free. I couldn't just go to the phone and call anybody. There were certain hours.
So how did your basic training compare to what the men were learning?
They were learning how to. Theirs was a lot more physical and learning how to qualify with an M16 rifle, which I didn't learn until my third year in the military. I had to learn it to get out of the military because things had changed. I had to learn how to do that and also how to swim in a full pack, and so it was very different.
So after basic training, where did you go next for your other trainings?
I went out to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, and that's absolutely beautiful place, kind of distraction a little bit, but it was, and that was almost, I went as for Russian linguist, and that's like a year-long course, so you're there for a long time.
Were there a lot of other women around you or mostly men?
It was, I would say the majority were men, but there was one barracks that was all women.
Was there anyone that like came with you from basic training?
There was, and that was nice. There were a couple girls from Oregon and from Washington State. None of them were going into Russian. They were going to German, Spanish, and Arabic, which is as long and as hard as a Russian course. So it was nice. There was different. I wasn't leaving everybody behind.
Yes.
I had people coming with me, so it made it easier.
So, how did you training with men affect your training overall, you think?
I don't think that had much of an impact because it was not only men at the school, you were also training with FBI and CIA agents. That was more intimidating than the men, but I don't think that really made a big impact.
Awesome. So did you go somewhere else for more training after that?
The traffic analyst piece is done either at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, or you can also go to Lackland Air Force Base. I went to Fort Devens.
So how long was that course?
That's only 6 weeks, and they're teaching you just more about how to configure, radios and pick up signals and things like that. Which was kind of like, this is what I'm going to be doing. I thought I was going to be sitting in an embassy saying, "Oh, welcome," in Russian, and that wasn't quite the deal. The first word I learned was attack, so that was kind of like, oh wait a minute.
So do you still remember a lot of your Russian?
Some of it. I like watching the news when they have Russian on. I'm trying to listen to it a little bit.
So was that your last stop of training, or did you go somewhere else?
No, that was the last stop for training.
So once you were done with all your training, did you kind of get to pick like what your specialty was, like where you went and worked with the Russian that you learned?
Not for that tour. It was funny. I got orders to go to Fort Sheridan, which is in Hawaii, and I thought, oh, cool, because it was in support of the Vietnam War. Made sense. And they have a little thing called the post office, and it was going to APO San Francisco, which meant you're going to the West Coast. I thought, oh, this is great. Well, they got a message, oh, there's been a change in your orders. You need to go and get amended orders. I thought, okay, fine. Go down there. And the only thing that changed was instead of APO San Francisco, it was APO NY. I said, what does this mean? It means you're going to Germany instead of Hawaii. So I thought, oh, okay. So that's when you learn you don't get to control everything. Yeah. You go where they send you.
That makes sense. So what was your role and responsibilities in Germany?
When I first got there, I was still waiting for a security clearance. So I got to type traffic reports for the MPs on the base that I was at. That was interesting. Once my clearance came through, I went to a small border site and then took on the traffic analyst role.
So were you listening to groups of people? Were you listening to like one specific person in the group or the group as a whole?
You would try and identify one specific person because that gave you, you knew where they were moving, because that was the other thing we're looking for was keeping track of troop movements. That's the traffic analyst part of it. So I developed a relationship with a guy named Boris. But of course, he couldn't hear me because it was strictly listening. It was all listening and writing down what we thought we were hearing that was sent back then to NSA for translation.
So what was like the setup like to listen to their conversations? Did you just have like a little microphone that you were listening in from, or was it this huge setup that you had?
It was called a pod, and you would go in and you had earphones and you would be listening and you would be dialing in, trying to figure out where this person was that night.
So did you get assigned Boris, or did you kind of pick Boris by yourself?
I picked him by myself. I liked his voice.
So was it kind of hard to keep track of what they said, or was it like very clear?
Especially, I think if you've learned any language, a native speaker, you always think, could you slow down? Because they're rambling so fast. So our job was to get the general gist of it, and it was being tape recorded at the same time. So our communications group would then send the tapes to DC for the real linguists to go through it. But we got first shot, so.
That's really cool. So what was the most memorable thing that you heard Boris say?
He said, May Day is a big Russian holiday. It's their big independence. And we were listening to him, and you could tell he had been imbibing on some Russian vodka. And all of a sudden he says, I know you're listening. We went, oh, because that was hilarious. They're trying not to laugh. But he can't hear us at all because, again, we had just headsets on. So that was memorable.
What was your favorite part about living in Germany?
I'm very fortunate that in my assignment, I didn't live in a barracks. I lived in an apartment, and learning to navigate a different culture. And I didn't know German. I had like the basics. Now having to shop, and I love their open markets on Saturdays. I think that was my favorite part, being exposed to something totally different. My landlord was a very rich landlord, and his son drove a Porsche, so I became friends with him. So I saw a lot of the country fly by.
Oh, that's really cool.
So that was good.
So what were some of the perks of being a woman instead of a man living in that apartment and getting to explore more?
One of the big things was as soon as I took off my uniform, I blended right in. I could, whereas a man at that time, men had very long hair, and if you were a GI, you had very short hair. So it was they knew right away that you were a soldier.
So did you go anywhere else except for Germany to be a traffic analyst, or was it strictly only Germany?
I ended up being rotated back to, I asked for Fort Carson, Colorado, and because they said women couldn't serve overseas for more than 3 years. And I was only 18 months into my tour, and they said, oh, you have to go back to the States. I said, I'm just learning this job. I just know how to do it. And so they said, well, all right, you can pick your 3 places you want to go. And I picked anywhere west of the Mississippi. My favorite would have been Fort Carson, Colorado. I got Fort Meade, Maryland. And I'm like, that's another, like, okay, you don't always get to go where you want. But I understood it. My training, I was best suited to go to Fort Meade because that's where the National Security Agency is, and that's who we were supporting. So I'm okay.
So were you like were you still listening to people who were speaking when you were in Fort Meade, or was it a completely different job than you were used to?
It was a completely different job. I was assigned to an S2 office, which is a security office, and I would be I think it's 7 years you have to update your clearance, and I would be interviewing people, but also taking classified documents that we would get, taking them to NSA, and then bringing classified documents back.
So was it like kind of rough to like get your clearance back again, or was it just kind of like a breeze to do?
The site I was at in Germany had a real drug problem, and they ended up being shut down. And just because I had served at that site, when I got to Maryland, before they'd let me do my other job, I had to meet with the S2 official and go. They had a list of everyone was there, and I just did an interview, and they did give me my clearance back. I didn't know it had been pulled, but I understood why they did it. So,
yeah. So, what was it like? Can you explain the process of getting your clearance and everything?
Initially, it's my neighbors. I mean, I grew up in Pewaukee, this little town, and they wanted to know. They sent the FBI out, and they knock on my neighbor's door, and it's like, what is your daughter doing that the FBI is here? So that, and it took a long time. Like I said, the only place I had been was Florida, so I didn't think it would take that long, and I was 21 years old. Um, it's a process, and like I didn't have much at that time. When you get people, when they're renewing them after 7 years, now they've been all over the world. They lived overseas, and you need all these addresses and all these contacts and everything. It becomes quite a process to keep your clearance current because they want to make sure that you haven't switched sides or anything.
So what kind of clearance did you get?
I had a top secret. They called it crypto, so I could because it was you're processing messages.
So where does that lie on the ranks of clearance?
Right.
Like right at the top.
Very, yeah.
So there's
to
no
top.
clearance above that at all?
I believe there is, but it's right at the top.
Oh, gotcha. So what do you consider to be your most important contribution during your service?
I had thought about this because and it actually was to prove to myself and to my male counterparts that a woman could do this job because I was surprised. I actually received an Army Commendation Medal in red for being conscientious, doing my supporting the mission and everything, because there was a struggle to get recognized as a woman in a non-traditional job. So I think that was, and to show other young ladies that you can do this. It's hard. We're not saying it's easy, but you can do this.
That's so. Did you like meet anyone that you think that you might have helped them see that it's okay to join the Army and that?
In language school, to like hang in there. I mean, it's brutal. I mean, it is brutal training. And then afterwards, since then, I would always do the veterans thing at the school to encourage young girls. And when you think about it, when I started, I couldn't go to military academy because women weren't allowed till 1975. The last Super Bowl, we had 4 Navy pilots that were all female. It has changed. So, go for your dream, shoot for something high.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So out of everywhere that you went for even training or just your service, where was your favorite place?
I would say the border site because it let me from there explore the rest of Europe. So that was very important to me.
So after you were done with your service, were you pretty ready to go home?
I was. They always, before you get discharged, you have to talk to your reenlistment officer or, and normally they try and teach you or convince you that this is the life for you. And I had this old Southern E8, and I thought, oh, here we go. And it was so funny. I walked in, and because as being enlisted, you're especially a high-ranking enlisted, you're very respectful. I just sat down, and he said something that just totally shocked me. He goes, I'm not even going to try and give you the reenlistment spiel. What I want you to do is go back, get your degree, come in as an officer, and I'd be honored to serve under you.
Wow.
So that's the highest compliment.
So did you think about taking that action and actually doing that, or were you just done with serving?
I was done because I thought, well, okay, I'd become an officer and I'd probably end up in Turkey or someplace. And I wanted to be able to chart my own path going forward.
So when you got home, what was the biggest culture shock of what changed at your house and everything?
My family's attitude towards being in the military. And my dad said, well, you should have gone in the Navy, but I'm glad you did what you did. So that was it.
So if you could, would you go back and join the Navy?
I would, if I could have gone to the Naval Academy, absolutely.
Interesting. So what was it like to transition to civilian life after the military?
One of the things, that's why I took a 4-year enlistment, so I could, if I had to, go back to my old job, which I did, but still continued with school. But it was different. I actually got a better job. The requirement is they just have to keep a job for you. It was a better job, and because of the military training, they were looking for business analysts, computer programmers, because that was just coming into vogue, and the company was willing to train. So they just saw the word analyst. They didn't realize traffic is different than code, but they said, okay, so they put me through 3 months of school to become a computer programmer, which kind of charted my career that way.
So do you think it was easier for you to learn how to do the coding analyst instead of someone else because of your training with traffic analyst?
I think so, because you're very focused. You have to be able to figure out where this is going, and that's the same thing with coding. What are you trying to achieve? Where are you taking this?
So where did you work, or where did you go to work after the military?
I went back to Wisconsin Bell, that became AT&T, and then after that, I transferred to AT&T in Texas.
Oh, wow. So what are some of the life lessons you learned from military service?
That you want teamwork, because at that time there weren't female sports. Teamwork, the that dedication to mission, that you're going to hit bumps along the road and it's going to take a while. Respect for authority, and that you don't always get to choose the course, but there is, even in civilian life, there is a chain of command, and I think I learned that.
So when you came back from the military, did you do more things to fight for women's rights?
I did. One of the big things, and it happened to me even coming out of that, the difference in pay, where I'd be sitting next to a male programmer that was making more than me. I'm like, we're doing the same job. We're still at this. So I became a manager at AT&T and really fought for women's pay to get where it should be, and also that maternity leave shouldn't kill someone's career. That got so that because we were losing so many really good female programmers to British Telecom because they could work from home. AT&T didn't have that policy and fought hard to get so they could work from home while they were on maternity leave if they chose to. Yeah.
So speaking of maternity leave, what was it like, the maternity leave process for the military and the Army?
When I went in, you were discharged if you got married. Then it changed to you got discharged if you were going to have a child. Then it went to you could stay in and you had 6 weeks of maternity leave and you had to come back. This is all in a 4-year period. Those are big changes.
Yeah.
And I think it's very hard. I can't imagine having a child doing the military life. And it's still controversial, where there was a female lieutenant who wanted maternity leave, and they said no, she had to resign. But yet there was a lieutenant who broke his leg and couldn't fly, but he got to stay behind a desk for 9 months. So this still goes on, but it's a lot better. It's a lot better.
So were you really happy with those changes when that was happening, or did you think that like more could happen?
I think always more can happen, but I was so glad to see the progress being made. So like I said, I also learned you can't change the world in one day. You can't change the Army in maybe a lifetime. But no, they made a lot of changes. I think we're headed in the right direction, as long as young ladies, it's going to be a lot of work. You go out and at least try and have a mentor or somebody along the way that will help them. So I think that's good.
So because you worked with men compared to like women, do you find it like easier to work with men nowadays?
This might sound terrible, but I actually preferred working with men, because men, it was more about the task at hand, whereas a lot of times with women, it was, oh, did you see what she was wearing? And I'm like, I don't care, as long as she's got clothes on. We need to focus here. And I think, what I found is women were making it into management, that women managers were much harder on females than males. And I'm like, what is this about? So my preference still is males. That's me. But I will actually, if a female approaches me, I will do everything I can to help them.
So you found it better. Do you think that like helped your experience that you were working around men because you enjoyed it better?
Absolutely. I got like I said, men from all over the country, a whole different appreciation for just people in general and the differences and how they approach things. Yeah.
So what were your you think most memorable awards that you got for being in the Army?
I think the RCOM meant a lot to me because that is one that an officer has to put you in for and has to be approved by the Department of Defense and all that. I also got a good conduct medal, which that's just if you keep your nose clean for and don't don't get in trouble for doing 3 years straight. So I got one of those. I thought that was good.
That's really cool. So, do you know the officer personally that put you in for that award?
It was the commander and my XO at the border site, and they were the ones that did. But I didn't get it till I had been reassigned to Fort Meade. And the funny thing, I got assigned to a tactical unit, which I had never really been in, and that's when I had to qualify with an M16 and all this other crazy stuff. But when they went to give me the award, they normally pin it on a soldier's lapel, and there are no lapels on women's dress uniforms. So that our XO was a great young up and coming black lieutenant who went and then just stopped. And he said, "How about if I hand this to you?" And I said, "That's great. That'll be fine." So again, they haven't worked out all the kinks and the difference of uniforms that they need to think about.
So you mentioned a tactical unit. How do you define what that is?
It was one that where you need to be ready to deploy at any time. That was where I didn't get fatigues until I got to Germany, and then they gave you fatigues and an entrenching tool and all these things. I had no idea what I'm going to do with this stuff. And even after serving, as long as I did in Germany, when I got back, I had at the end of your tour, you have to turn your stuff in. I had gotten 2 left boots and I didn't know it because I never wore them. So that's famous. You have 2 left feet. So I guess I did, but yeah, it was good.
So were you able to get your boots fixed, or were you just forced to wear 2 left boots?
I never wore them, so I just turned
Oh.
them in.
Oh,
So here you
phew.
go. You have these back.
So your tactical unit, like, were you expecting to go into that, or was it like complete shock to you?
That was complete shock when they just said you're going to Fort Meade, and I knew that that was where NSA was, and that was the Puzzle Palace. I thought, oh, I'll just wander in there, and it's like, which eventually I did, but it was in a different role, and so, but I had to drill and do physical fitness with this tactical unit. Like this was all new to me, and when they said you have to learn to not only shoot an M16, but break it down and clean it and being able to put it back together in a certain amount of time. And I think my eyes got its biggest saucers, like, what? I've got to do what? And I was there just a year, in less than a year. And I thought, I got to do this now to get out of the Army. So I wasn't expecting that.
So since you were working as on like physical things back when you were in like Germany, was it really hard for you to like shift into that for your body and everything?
Because I will say Germany has great food, and I lived on the economy. I didn't have to. I wasn't subjected to Army food, which isn't known for being good. I'll just say that.
So what was the hardest part you think for yourself? Was it like the training, or was it just getting back in like shape?
I think it was. I think it was the training. You know, I think that was the hardest part.
So what was the training like in Fort Meade for the tactical unit?
You had to go on a 2-mile run. You had to be able to do so many. It was like what men had to do to get out of basic training.
Oh boy.
So it kind of shifted gears, and now, I mean, it was such a change in 4 years. It was amazing to me.
So why do you think that you had to do that just to leave the military?
Because that's how the military works.
So you just did. So you just had to like kind of learn all that before you went home, just in case you got called back.
Just in case, because you actually do have an inactive. I had an inactive reserve commitment for, it's 10 or 12 years afterwards, where I didn't join a reserve unit. I was just kind of done. I wanted my life back, but I could have been called up. So you need to like, okay, what do you make sure you're in shape? Make sure you have your stuff ready to go if you need to go.
Was there ever a time that you were really worried that you thought that you were going to get called back?
when Desert Storm and all that started. I was in Scotland visiting a friend, and we were watching it on the news. And I'm thinking, okay, where's my stuff? Do I have am I ready to go? And I thought, no, wait, I've been out long enough. They can't call me.
So when you never got called back, what was it like to finally like feel like I'm done? Did you like get rid of all your stuff and everything?
I didn't get rid of all of it, but it was nice knowing I'm done.
Yeah.
They can't get me. I shouldn't say get me, but yeah, I was done. I just, because again, one of the things you learn is you don't have control and you don't know where you go. You don't get to say where you want to go.
That
So
is
those are
true.
important life lessons.
So was your family supportive of like when you might have been called back, or were they just like, good luck?
Good luck. Good luck. We'll see you.
So if you would have gotten called back, would you have gone back to Fort Meade or Germany?
I don't know where I would have gone
Oh,
back.
so it could have been
Could have been anywhere.
anywhere?
Mm-hmm.
So would it been for a traffic analyst, or would it have been for like a tactical unit?
You can be a traffic analyst in a tactical unit.
Oh, okay.
Because they move around a lot, and you just sit in a little like trailer like the size of a back of a semi truck, doing the same job.
Oh wow. So when you did that, like, was it like very like overwhelming, and like were a lot of people with you and you felt kind of claustrophobic?
No, because you work 24-hour shifts, and so 8 hours, and you rotate. So at time it's probably like 12 people in the thing with you, so it wasn't that bad.
It wasn't that bad.
Mm-mm.
So was there a lot of like mechanics inside the trailer, or was it like all computers?
Oh, it was all computerized. Yeah.
So do you all have your own computers?
Mm-hmm. You sit in a little area and do your thing. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. From going from Germany to just being inside this like little camper.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Just that there's a lot to learn in the military, and for people who don't know what they want to do, look at the opportunities there. Look at also the educational benefits that you get when you come out. And for young ladies, it's a place where you get opportunities that you won't get anyplace else. So that's, I would say that.
Well, thank you, Bonnie.
Well, thank you, Sarah.
So, in closing, this has been an interview of Bonnie Gluth regarding her service during the Vietnam era. My name is Sarah Bogie, and the time is 9:48 a.m. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.